Okay, everybody, I think we're about ready to get started. So first of all, I want to thank everybody for joining us today. We're very excited to be able to present this webinar featuring Paul Erickson from our RMSA, Psychology of Price. And there's some really great information. I saw this webinar yesterday in our previous session, and I learned a lot. So I think you're in for a lot of really great information. And our guest today, Paul Erickson, he has many years of experience with RMSA in inventory strategies, pricing strategies, and he's going to be taking you through a lot of this today. Now, I am recording today's session, and so I'll be able to distribute the link in the coming days. But I want to first of all just give you a quick overview of what Paul is going to cover today. The initial markups and I guess the strategies that you use to decide, well, what is the profit that I want to be making on these specific items? And the approach that Paul is going to talk about is a deliberate and informed approach that will maximize your opportunities. I know that several of our customers use RMSA in their pricing strategies, and one springs to mind. They sell men's apparel, and they will go on and on about how beneficial this has been for their business. The psychology of pricing, the meat of it, cost-based practices, and what to avoid. Sometimes cost is the only factor that retailers use sometimes to decide what their markups and markdowns will be based on, and that's not necessarily the most advantageous way to approach it. And then he's going to go over some rules that every retailer should know. We make retail tools for independent businesses, and I think that the message that Paul has a lot of resonance with these kinds of retailers where you have anywhere from 1 to say 5 or 10 or 15 stores, because that type of business retailer is so agile and they can adapt to the very quickly evolving market conditions. Now, Lightspeed is a point of sale that sort of covers every aspect of a retail store, from inventory management, CRM, mobile retail, e-commerce reporting. Our customers number more than 22,000 now, and together they process up to upwards of $9 billion annually. And that means that this is a group of retailers that are very focused on their brick and mortar store, and they're very serious about what it takes to make that work. And we've also got a channel of independent partners for implementing solutions in their markets. Okay, so now, sorry, Paul, I'll pass it over to you now.
Not a problem. Thanks, Brad, so much. Let's see. I think I have control at this moment. So there we are. Well, good morning, everybody. This is Paul Erickson. I am the Senior Vice President of RMSA. And just a quick note of who we are. For over 50 years, everyone at RMSA has been helping independent retailers do better financially, from increasing your sales, improving your cash flow, achieving better margins. Our processes work, and the proof is in our client base, most of which now have no contractual obligation with us. They are a month-to-month service that they continue to go on with us. We have many clients who have been with us for, believe it or not, 20 to 30 years. So it's a quick background of who we are. I am so happy to be here this morning with our wonderful partners at Lightspeed to present the psychology of price, the markup, markdown game. We'll start with initial markup, and there are a lot of outside influences that affect your profitability and your bottom line, but really setting the right price is a crucial step towards achieving that profit. And too many independent retailers don't look at initial markup as a way to improve their maintained markup or gross profit. There's nothing more fundamental in retailing than markup. Markup is retailing. It's our business. Our ability to buy merchandise, add markup to it, and then resell that merchandise is really what retail is all about. And if we don't have markup, there'd be no paying of expenses or the advertising, the payroll. In fact, there would be no profit at all if we didn't have any markup at all. So I would challenge everyone that is listening to this webinar this morning, are you really looking at increasing initial markup as a way to increase your bottom line? As we get started, we're going to do just a little bit of record keeping and understand this, that markup and margin are terms that we as retailers sometimes use interchangeably. I am as guilty of this as anybody, and I shouldn't, and we really shouldn't. We should understand the terms and how they're used accordingly. Markup is used with initial markup and maintain markup, and that is a retail term. Markup refers to the pricing of goods taking into account just the merchandise itself. It is the maintain markup, which is similar to gross profit, is calculated by looking at your initial markup and then factoring in your markdowns. On the other hand, margin is more from the accounting perspective. It's used with terms like initial margin and gross margin. And margin does take into certain expenses like freight, and is calculated from a beginning cost inventory plus receipts less an ending cost inventory. The retail method of calculation for markup is very, very simple. It's simply the original selling price minus cost divided by the original selling price. So you see in the example, if you paid $40 for an item and marked it $100, $60 of the 100 would be your margin, or 60%. That's why when a lot of retailers talk about doubling the price, they're really talking about 50% markup. If you hear a retailer say, I get 100% markup, well, they're using a cost-based method, which is really not the preferred way to go when we're talking about markup. Now, I've been in this business a long time, and doubling the cost paid for merchandise was once absolutely the rule for pricing products, particularly in the apparel business. It was always referred to as keystone markup, but it's no longer used as often as it once was. And I often asked, why did we just double the cost? Did that automatically? And what does the term keystone markup mean? And how did that even originate? Certainly, doubling the cost is going to be pretty easy for everybody. I'm sure the first retail store, everybody in the call doesn't know this, but it was actually during the caveman days, in the first caveman spear shop owned by Org. He used the keystone markup. Org said, spear cost Org 1 rock, Org sell for 2 rocks. But the term keystone markup has been around for so long, there is practically no definitive answers on where it came from. So a couple of years ago, I was curious, and I called the National Retail Federation in New York and asked them if they knew where this word in retail that was so commonly used, what was the origin of it. And they said, whether this is true or not, I'm not sure, there was actually a markup key on the old-time cash registers around the turn of the 20th century. And it would double the price automatically. The retailer would put in the cost price of the item, and then it would double, and it would ring up the sale. And this practice predated individually ticketed items, because a lot of retailers don't understand that pricing was oftentimes handled right at the point of sale. Remember, prior to the end of the 19th century, nothing was marked in retail stores. There were no prices on it. And it wasn't until a gentleman in Canada named Timothy Eaton pioneered a radical new concept called fixed pricing, in which every item in the Eaton stores in Canada would have a price on it, non-negotiable. That was the price you paid. Because prior to Timothy Eaton, bartering was very, very common in retail. Now, over the years, I've often asked retailers to define how they come up with their initial markup, and I get a lot of interesting answers, and they run the gamut from I double the cost and then add $2, or I use a multiplier of 2.2 or 2.3 as an example, or when asked why that item was ticketed at that specific price, I get something like, well, that's what I always price it at, and they get very defensive. But a little bit more on that later. These answers would lead anyone to the conclusion that most retailers truly can't explain what initial markup is to cover so that they can make money. So we're going to get things started with 3 key elements. There are 3 key areas in your store that your initial markup must cover for you to be profitable. The first is markdowns. if you're a fashion store, but really most stores that use Lightspeed and RMSA take markdowns. They're a normal part of our business, and they're a normal amount based on our history or from a markdown budget that we should be having based on these are the appropriate amount of markdowns we can take to keep the inventory turning and to keep our cash flow flowing. We need to know that number as a percentage. The next part is simply our overhead. It's the cost of operating our store. It includes things like our payroll, our marketing and advertising, travel, rent, office supplies, etc. We need to know that percentage of our overall sales. And certainly last but not least, every journey needs a destination. What's going to be our destination? What's our desired net profit this year? What's our profit goal? With those three percentages, we can now put that into a formula, and we can really now know what we need to price goods at over the course of an entire year based on what the percentage of the retail price has to be marked up. This is the formula. As Brad had said, this webinar is available through Lightspeed, that you can rewatch this and you can write this formula down. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it, but let's throw some numbers in and look at what we come up with. These are very standard numbers for independent retail in North America. So I put in a markdown percentage over the course of a year of 20%. Very, very common. Operating costs today generally run for the typical retailer around 40% to sales. And let's just say that we want to, at the end of the year, make a net profit. Our goal is 6% of our year. That's after everything's been paid for. If we run those percentages into the formula that you see below, you're going to see that essentially we need, over the course of the year, on the average, to have on our initial retail prices, 55% of those prices need to be initial markup. Now, if we didn't know that number and say we came in at just 2.5 points under that, at 52.5, what would that look like in terms of our bottom line? Well, a 2.5 points drop in IMU results in a bottom line being slashed by 3%, a 50% reduction in profit. In other words, a 52.5% with the same markdowns runs, the maintain now goes down to 43%. Expenses are 40 and we're at 3%. Now, what's interesting about this slide when you look at it is that if we increase from 52.5 to 55, which is 2.5 percentage points, the net profit increases by 3. And when you run these numbers in terms of increasing your initial markup, what you'll discover, and what's a motivating factor for most retailers, is that every dollar that you can increase your initial markup takes an express train right down to the bottom line, your net profit. That is a very, very exciting prospect, and that will hopefully motivate everybody on this webinar to look at initial markup as a way to really improve their bottom line. Now, what's 52.5% and 55% in terms of actual pricing? Well, 52.5% is, let's say you bought something for $9 cost and you marked it $19, that's 52.5%. But doubling your profit under those standardized numbers I shared with you, all you'd have to do in this particular example is take the $9 item and not mark it 19, but put 90 cents or 99 cents on the back of it. And in that case, that 90 or 99 cents, there's a lot of retailers that think 99 cents is cheesy. I don't disagree with them, but 90, not so much. That has you have the opportunity to dramatically change the money you're making in your retail store by understanding that concept. It's pricing psychology. And it is a very, very important concept for all retailers to understand. You know, I speak at universities throughout the United States. And several years ago, I spoke at Iowa State University in the heartland of America in Ames, Iowa. And it was a School of Business class. They were taking retailing. And we were talking about pricing psychology in my lecture. And a young man in the back of the room raised his hand and asked, and he seemed quite upset actually, and he said, "Mr. Erickson, do you really believe the consumer is that naive that when they see $19.99 on a tag, they don't think it's $20? Do you think shoppers coming into a retail store are that ignorant that when they see $99.50, they don't know it's really $100? And he went on for quite some time. After he was done, I asked if he felt better after he got that off his chest, and he said, actually, quite frankly, I do. And then I answered his question by saying that, do I believe that? Absolutely, because there are very few black and white things in retail. This happens to be one of them, though. Every study done on this for decades has shown that the consumer rounds down the price, never rounds up. Now, I'm not saying every single person does this, but the vast majority of your customers do. $9.95 is $9. $99 is 90 something. It's not 100. And without that knowledge and understanding that fact, you will never ever get more initial markup. Now, pricing is competitive, and the consumers have many choices and are generally willing to shop around to receive the best price. Obviously, e-commerce and online sales have changed the landscape of retail. 70% of all purchases now done in brick and mortar stores originate online. So we're not ever advocating that you're pricing everything up a little bit to achieve more initial markup. It's just where you can. Now, there's lots of other competitive pricing schemes, of course, that you can use in terms of multiple pricing. Multiple pricing is a method which involves selling more than one product for one price. It's a buy one, get one BOGO type promotion, such as 3 items for $1, or buy the first item at full price and the second item at the same price or less at half off. If anyone's ever seen a Joseph A. Bank commercial, they understand multiple pricing. Not only is this strategy great for markdowns and sales events, but consumers tend to purchase in larger amounts where multiple pricing strategies exist. Discount pricing, or some people call high-low pricing, is done by major chains like JCPenney, Kohl's, Macy's, etc. Very, very common in those chains, which includes regular price $120, our everyday low price $99, or compare at, or rebates, or coupons. That's discount pricing. Once you're in the discount pricing vortex, it's very difficult to get out. And certainly nothing showed us that reality more than the difficulty JCPenney had a few years ago in changing their pricing concept, which almost broke their back financially. Everyone knows about loss leaders. Merchandise priced at or below cost is referred to as loss leaders. You know, retailers make no profit on those discounted items that they advertise, but the strategy is consumers will purchase other related products at higher margins during their visit to the store. Most basic competitive pricing: know your competition. Simply know how your competition is pricing their products. Examine the vendor channels of distribution in your area. Know where the merchandise is in the competition and price accordingly. Again, let me repeat, no one is suggesting you price higher what they can easily find in a competitor store or online for that matter. And last but not least is certainly customer service. Retailers considering any competitive pricing strategy should never forget that they will always still need to provide outstanding customer service to stand above the competition. Often, a great in-store experience can mitigate the amount of promoting we need to schedule. Now, MSRP, while used extensively in, say, new car dealerships, pricing products with the manufacturer's suggested retail price supplied by the vendor in stores puts you out of the decision-making process. Generally speaking, these prices are using initial markups much lower than what the typical independent retailer needs to make a profit. MSRP prices are generally created in the vendor's favor, not in your favor. The other thing I'd like you to consider is understanding the gravity of cost, which pulls us in. Are we making markup decisions on merchandise based on what our product will sell for or what you paid for it? And I would urge everyone to consider this when buying products that is not readily available in competitor stores or are not as readily price compared. What I'm suggesting is that we decide what we think we can sell a certain item for prior to knowing the cost. Determine the price when writing the order. The pitfall we run into is if we have an item that you look at, and you and your partner sitting with a salesperson, and you both look at the item not knowing what the cost is. Decide what you think you can realistically sell it for. Let's just go through that process. You're sitting there, they give you an item that no one else carries it in your town. It's not really price compared that much. You can get away with a little more markup. You look at your partner and you say, what do you think we can sell this for? You both agree you can sell it for $29. And then you look at each other and say, wait, Paul Erickson would say market $29.50. So you both decide that you're going to mark this $29.50. You then make the decision to buy or not based on the cost. Let's say the cost was $7. Well, if you knew the cost before you went through that exercise, let's all be honest, we probably wouldn't stretch it to $29. We'd probably say, let's mark it $19.50 and be pretty proud of ourselves. But we would have been sucked in and drawn in by what I call the gravity of cost. Try not to do that. It will help you improve your markup. Let me tell you a quick story that relates to this. Several years ago, I was in Orlando, Florida, giving a seminar, and it was on this very same topic. Afterwards, my sponsors and I went to lunch. We came back from lunch, heading back to the convention center where the presentation was held. And we happened, interesting enough, to be walking in front of a luxury menswear store. The owner had just attended the seminar. He happens to see me walking by his store. He runs out, stops me in my tracks, says, Paul, thank you so much for the information. I've already started to institute your initial pricing schemes. I looked at him and I said, already? It's been 30 minutes. He said, I went back to the store. I went into my back room, my receiving area. There, my tie buyer, my necktie buyer, was unpacking several boxes of Robert Talbot ties and putting price tags on them. Now, just as a bit of information, Robert Talbot ties are beautiful ties and they're very expensive, as was everything else in his store. Every tie that was being marked was marked $115. The owner of the store went to the tie buyer and said, Bill, can I ask you a question? He said, sure. How did you determine the $115? Very basic question in retail. And of course, you know what Bill told him? He said, well, that's what I always mark them at. Well, the owner then asked him, but why not $119? And Bill said, well, I suppose we could do that. We've always been selling for $115. Remember on how this merchandise, this category is sold in the store. No one is going online and shopping ties, not in these price points. The ties themselves are being sold after a businessman comes in and buys a $2,000 suit, and then the salesperson puts on the suit, they put it on a table, various dress shirt tie combinations, which the businessman selects more times than not even looking at the price or simply asking, but not really, as long as it was reasonable based on what they should pay for that dress shirt and tie. No one would not spend $119 but spend $115. He was literally walking away, in this case, of $4 for every tie, and he sold last year 1,000 Robert Talbot ties. It was $4,000. That's what you have to look for in your store. That's what you have to find. Those areas. It's not everywhere, but you have to find those areas and then be brave to be able to have the courage to take more markup. Everyone on this call are entrepreneurs. We all have a lot of our capital at risk in our stores. And we deserve to make more money. That gentleman in Orlando deserved to be more profitable with all the other services he did for his customers. And pricing products a little bit higher where you can. And let me say that again, a little bit higher is something we all need to investigate and have strategies to do. A little bit of review on initial markup. First of all, we all need to know what is the right product price based on competition and based on its intrinsic value. Every product category needs to be priced separately. In that men's store, a Canali or Zegna suit is going to be compared possibly online or other stores. It's a bigger ticket item. He has to be competitive. The ties, other items, socks, things like that, he can get away with a little more markup. Steer clear of cost-based pricing. Beware the pull of cost-based gravity when you price merchandise where you can get more markup. Always use, wherever possible, psychological pricing. Always use psychological pricing. And don't be afraid of cent signs. I'm going to tell you another quick story. A lot of my webinars, by the way, are full of stories, but I think stories are more important than formulas because they're real and they happen. About 2 years ago, I was called into New York to sit with a retailer who was needing some help. They had a number of stores in Manhattan and also on Long Island. And I was out in their Long Island headquarters. And they were looking, their accountant told them they needed to cut $1 million in expenses. And they wanted me to come in and maybe talk about how they could be more efficient with inventory, how they can do that without having to fire people, to advertise less, and do things that might be counterproductive in terms of cutting expenses. One of the things I did before I had the meeting in the morning is visited one of their stores that evening. And one of the things I noticed is all the merchandise was priced fairly well, but it had no cents on it. Now, people always think cents is 99 cents. But I went into the meeting the next morning and I asked them, how many SKUs, how many items did you sell last year in your stores? And the IT person was there and he looked it up and he said, we sold 2 million SKUs last year. I go, why don't you put 50 cents on every single thing? If you're selling a blouse for $119, no one is not going to buy it or notice it even if you put 50 cents in, $119.50. 50 cents times 2 million is $1 million. Now they looked, there was silence in the room and they thought I was joking, but I really wasn't. Think outside the box a little bit on pricing and understand how pricing can make a huge difference. Because as I said, we are all entrepreneurs. As key expenses go up, so should your IMU. What goes up must come down. And so any discussion on pricing has to include the other side of the equation, which are markdowns, the word markdown. That word strikes fear in the hearts of most retailers. Call it by whatever term you wish, from price adjustments or promotions or just running a plain old sale. The translation is the same. It conjures up lots of negative emotions for retailers. The fact remains, however, that any reduction in the retail price is a markdown. And that markdown is an expense in your store every bit as real as your payroll expense or the rent you pay to your landlord. But this is an expense, this markdown expense, that you don't write a check for. Because I think if retailers had to get your checkbook out every time you took a markdown and looked at markdowns on your P&L at the end of the year and saw how high they could be, we'd probably try to investigate ways to cut them. Now, markdowns don't show up on your P&L and your income statement. It shows up by increasing your cost of goods sold. We did this for the National Shoe Retailers Association several years ago. I was very much a part of this survey that we did for shoe stores throughout North America, both in the United States and Canada. And we found for family-owned shoe stores, the typical advertising cost as a percent of the overall retail sales volume in the store was 3.3%. The typical shoe store was paying about 8% of their sales in rent. They were paying 19.5% in payroll, but markdowns an expense as real as absolutely everyone else, everything else on their income statement was running 20.6%. The highest expense they had were the markdowns they were taking. In fact, the United States Census Bureau and the National Retail Federation got together several years ago and looked at big box retailers, understanding that there are certain kinds of markdowns. There are planned markdowns, there are budgeted markdowns. Those are good markdowns, but they wanted to find what the markdown level was taken by these stores that were eating into their bottom line. And it was calculated, and this is a little bit of an old survey, it was done maybe 7 or 8 years ago, that $200 billion a year were being lost to publicly traded retailers in the United States due to excessive markdowns. Now, many think markdowns are something that just happens at the end of the season, after the final peak sales weeks, and it's all over, and now we're going to put everything on sale that's left. But the truth is that more often than not, excessive markdowns result from decisions made and actions taken or not taken much, much earlier. Frequently, even before the season even starts. Let's talk about that for a second. There's no creature on planet Earth more optimistic than a retailer. It is in our DNA. I love retailers because of that. We always believe that good things are going to happen. We're in a business that when it comes to inventory, we can't be right, and we still love it. We can't be right with inventory because we can't buy exactly the right amount. You either overbought a little bit and you had to mark it down or carry it over, or we underbought and we said, gee, we could have had, if we would have bought 5 times the amount of that item, we still would have sold it. So we're in a business that we can't be right with buying. We just have to be close. That's the internal optimist we are. We go into a season anticipating a nice increase in sales. This season, the merchandise is better. The weather is going to break just right. The merchandise will arrive right on time. And then we go out and buy more than the traffic in our store will bear. Now, once that inventory is bought and received early in the season to set the store in order to support those optimistic sales increases we had planned. Yet many times those early season plans frequently don't pan out because they may have been unrealistic and were predicated on everything happening and breaking just right. The inventory then starts to back up. And then the next round of deliveries come in. But the initial deliveries haven't sold through yet. And the retailer quickly becomes overstocked, making it difficult both to display the merchandise and, quite frankly, overstocked stores are difficult for the customers to shop. As the inventory backs up, the core customers, the backbone really of any successful retailer, sees the same things, the same assortments, on the second visit and the third visit and the fourth visit in a row, which further depress sales and depress sell-throughs and further backs up inventories. And then we realize that we're going to have to take some markdowns in an effort to bring the inventory back in line. The customer then becomes incentivized to do further purchases even more until the prices get even cheaper. Because your core customer is smart. They can sense when you're overstocked, and they understand if they wait, they'll wait you out. They can probably buy that item cheaper. And that customer reticence feeds the cycle even further. And what does this mean for your store? When your core customer is waiting for that item to go on sale, well, by this time, your unbridled optimism has given way to the realization your inventory is way too high, cash is way too low, and that is when those clearance markdowns are taken, and the impact is pretty significant. Now let's do a little bit of the calculation of what I'm talking about on markdowns. Markdowns are the formula is simply total retail markdowns divided by your net sales after markdowns. In other words, in the example you see below, we had a $100 item that we sold for $80 or 20% off, but it is calculated from the retail method as an $80 sale and a $20 markdown, so markdowns were 25% of retail sales. Now, in all things, there are good and bad. And even though you have an inherent disdain for the very word markdown, as most retailers do, taking too many markdowns represents a failure in some area or another. But not all these markdowns are necessarily bad. There are acceptable markdowns. There are markdowns that are part of your cost of doing business. There are markdowns that drive traffic into your store. Having a markdown a plan is really simply an admission that we as retailers are all flawed creatures. We make mistakes. And actually, in many ways, and some of the great retailers want to make mistakes to push the envelope and know how many mistakes they're allowed to make and still make the profit that they want to do at the end of the year. Now, the good markdowns. These markdowns keep your inventory fresh. It keeps the inventory rotating in and out of the store. It assures good cash flow. And it is a cost of doing business. The bad markdowns are when they get so high that they're actually higher than any other expense on your income statement, and it raises the cost of goods sold and can at times result in a net loss for a retail store. So what are these root causes of excessive markdowns? Because it's important to understand what causes the bad markdowns in terms of hurting our profitability. Now, there are lots of root causes, and they run the gamut of poor buying and bad styles and incorrect sizes and incorrect price points and too many vendors and buying wide and thin instead of narrow and deep and buying minimums that are just simply too large for us to absorb and duplicate items. And I could go on and on and on this. And those are truly root causes. But there is one general cause of excessive markdowns that has been true since the beginning of retail itself, the original sin: overbuying. Buying more merchandise than you can realistically sell is the number one cause of excessive markdowns. Now, how you define overbuying is based on the type of store you have. But we need to understand what the perishable or what our shelf life is of merchandise. Let's take, for example, a women's fashion store in ready-to-wear or outerwear or dresses, things like that. But if you have a menswear, if you have children's, or if you have shoes, or if you have sporting goods, these numbers aren't that much different. But we did this study at RMSA several years ago, and we found that 90% of your sales in a women's fashion store come from inventory less than 10 weeks old. That's all sales. That's including markdown. Markdowns get old too. 90%. That is an amazing number. In fact, we also found that 50% of sales came from merchandise that was unpacked and then sold within the month, and that merchandise was never posted up into an EOM inventory. Depending on the merchandise type, but all inventory, with the possible exception of gold and a fine Cabernet, depreciates over time and has a defined shelf life. Simply put, if a category has a goal of 4 turns a year, then we should never buy more or never stock more than what we can realistically sell in 3 months. And markdown decisions need to take place within that defined time frame, recognizing the shelf life and taking markdowns by recognizing slow sellers in season. Now, once we recognize that, there's some techniques that we should be aware of in terms of being able to control the markdowns just by being a little smarter. When we take in-season markdowns, many times I see retailers who have a rack that says, sale 20% off. Everything on the rack is 20% off. And then I walk into another store and I see sale. Everything on this rack has just been reduced. Just been reduced. Signage declaring just reduced without being locked into a specific percentage or dollar off is going to save you a lot of money, and it's going to improve your bottom line. Percentages off are easy to do and cost you money. The word just is important. Customers love brand new discounts just like they love brand new merchandise. The word just creates the urgency and creates the importance. Just reduced, just arrived, those things go together. Now let's talk a little bit about these percentages off, because I want everyone in the call to get off of the percentage off game. It is not helping you. Psychological pricing works the same as markdown as it does markup. Psychological pricing used when prices are set to a certain level where the consumer perceives the price to be fair, and use odd pricing like $24.90 and $29.90 is the common method and should be used on the just reduced rack or table. See, the math of psychological pricing is simply this. The original price is $38. It's on a table at 25% off. The consumer knows it's on sale, which is a positive, and is lured to the bargain, but has no idea what the price is until it's being rung up at the POS register. But if it was put, the price at 25% off is $28.50. If it was on the rack, which was a psychological pricing of just reduced and was marked $29.99, they would buy it just as fast, but you would save 4 points on that item. Now that's you would sell it for $1.49 more, and I know that one item doesn't make a big difference in your bottom line for the year. But if you do this over the course of the year all the time, it does make a significant difference. Let's say there's a $98 item on a table for 20% off. No one again knows what it's selling for. It's $78. But if it was put on the just reduced table with a psychological price of $79.99, that would be sold at 18% off. 2 points, 4 points, 3 points, 5 points, 1 point, whatever it is, continually doing that is going to save you a lot of money and will not affect sales whatsoever. Now, at clearance time, the rules will change a little bit. Today's clearance customers has kind of fallen in love with taking additional percentage off, right? And that's really started from the large chain stores years ago as a way to easily record point-of-sale markdowns. But today, it's kind of become part of the retail lexicon. So when you see 25%, these items are 25% off, but this weekend take an additional 15% off, it's 40% off, correct? Well, not really, because it's actually 36.25% off. 50% off, everything 50% off, but this weekend take another 20% off is 70% off. Appears to be, but it's really 60% off. What's interesting is this is a marketing power. The marketing power is such that the actual selling price is actually higher than what the consumer might think to move the item. In both instances, taking an additional is less of a total markdown than what it appears. Now, in everything else in life, markdowns have rules, and we're going to go over a few rules. The first rule is that we need to plan. Everybody should have a plan, markdown, budget. Use that budget and don't be under. Let me explain what that budget might look like in general. Let's say you have a store that has let's say you think you'll do $800,000 in your store this year. So that's your planned sales. Your planned profit or gross profit is 50%. That's what I want to maintain. So my profit on those sales of $800,000 will be $400,000. But my initial markup averages 60%. So if I buy it for 4, I mark it 10. Or if I buy $400,000, I mark it $1 million over the course of the year. But my sales plan was 800. Now you have just created a markdown budget for your store of $200,000. Now you know that over the course of a year, you can divide that by 12 or push most of those markdowns in January and July if you're seasonal. But you now know these are absolutely acceptable markdowns that I should take to keep the inventory turning, keep the inventory fresh, and you have confidence that you're not going to hurt yourself or harm the business financially. Always try to use price points. Stay away from percentages. Price points and the idea of just reduced, the freshness of markdowns is important. And you should always learn from every markdown you take. That should be a learning experience. Why did you take the markdown? Why didn't it sell? So that we won't make the same mistake twice. Markdowns should be viewed by you as sort of a tuition that you pay for your education of your customer. Pay the tuition, but make sure you don't fall asleep in class. Pay the tuition and learn, and don't make the mistake twice. There are also some truths about markdowns that I want to go over with you this morning. The first truth is very, very important. Tell the customer why it's marked down. Always explain it to them why you're doing it. Because if we fail to explain to them that this is end of season, damaged, defective, overstock, special purchase, special offer, weekend sale, just tell them why. Don't just put up a sale sign. Is if we don't tell them why, we run the risk of them never believing any of our prices and turning each interaction with a customer into a mini auction. Well, Bill, I see this is on sale, but when are you going to put that over there on sale? Tell them why it's on sale. As I said before, overbuying is the #1 cause of excessive markdowns. Control your inventories. Have a good buy plan. Again, if you want 4 turns, never buy or stock more merchandise than you can realistically sell in 13 weeks. Remember, merchandise is perishable, and in many times, scarcity can breed demand. All inventory levels in your store should be based on time. How long is it going to take me to sell it? When I ask a smart retailer how much inventory they have, they generally do not tell me they have X amount at cost or X amount at retail or how many SKUs or how many items or how many dozens or how many case backs. They don't even bring that up because that number on its own is completely meaningless. What's an important thing they tell me is I usually try to keep about a 2.5 or 3 month supply. If you do that, you'll control markdowns. The old adage, the first markdown is the cheapest. I think everybody believes this, and it is true. But it's true, I think, for maybe sometimes for reasons that some retailers don't understand. Because you need to make the first markdown work. If the $115 ties at that men's store, if we've got an ugly one, it's unlikely that if we take a markdown quickly and mark it down to $104.99, that's going to work. In fact, it won't. In fact, if that $115 tie is really ugly, we made a mistake and we recognize it quickly, and if we know that what will sell it will be $49.90, and that'll get them out the door, then do it. Get your cash back and reinvest something in the store that will sell better. In-season, quick markdowns are meant to be killed, not maimed. Nothing is more sad in a retail store than a wounded markdown, and we've all seen it. We walked into stores where the original price was $198. A line was drawn through that to $169. A line was drawn through that to $143. A line was drawn through that to $119. Another line, and we're at $79. Well, you know the picture. Can you imagine the message that tells the consumer? Take your markdowns and make sure they work. And in the same vein, the price you paid for the item has nothing to do with the markdown price. Many, many years ago, the old retailers I used to encounter 20, 30 years ago, they would tell me, well, Paul, I can't mark it below 50 because that was my cost and I want to get my cost out of it. Ladies and gentlemen, cost means nothing. It means absolutely nothing when determining the markdown price. The markdown price is determined by what will sell the merchandise quickly. The element of time in retail is absolutely everything. This is a business of speed, not a business of trying to milk out margin over the course of many, many months, if not years. As I said before, learn from every markdown, pay your tuition. We can profit from that loss if we are educated on why we took the markdowns. We have so much to learn from our customers on pricing. Pay your tuition and learn from it. It's also a good idea when not in clearance time to keep your markdowns at the back of the store, where your customer has to search for them, where you can drag them through the whole store and tempt them with new items first. And then last but not least is nurture your customers who do not shop you on price alone. The typical boutique in the United States and Canada have typically less than 100 really good customers. We don't have that many. We can absolutely smooch them. Rank your customers by gross profit. Send them thank you cards. Maintain close relationships. Add value to what you do with them. Become more than an item provider in their lives. Good retailers, good independent retailers, do not look upon someone coming into their store as a potential customer to sell them something. Let me say that again, because a lot of people's ears perk up when I say that. Smart retailers do not look upon someone walking through your front door as a customer. That is just an opportunity to sell them something. Smart retailers look at those people as opportunities to develop a relationship. And when you have that view of your customers, you'll do better. Now, what do I mean by that? Several years ago, I was in a shoe store in the Midwest in the United States, very successful shoe store, known for their customer service. The owner is a great guy. After our meeting, he said, Paul, we're going to take you in, we're going to sell you some shoes. So I went in there, and by the way, he asked me my shoe size, and I'm not ashamed to admit it, I'm a 12B. I have like skis as feet. He said, well, if we don't sell you any shoes today, I'll sleep well tonight, because we try to have strong stocks in us. We're in a size width business in the middle. And if we walk someone like you, I don't like it, but I'll understand. If you were 11C, it would be more of a problem. The salesman named, I think, Marty, took me in to the store, sold me 2 pairs of shoes. One was a pair of suede shoes. As he was writing it up at the counter, he said, Paul, do you have some spray for this? You need to spray these. And I thought about it. I hadn't bought a pair of suede shoes for quite some time, and so I couldn't remember if I had any or not. And I go, gee, I don't know. I'm not sure I do. And he goes, here, you need some spray. And at this point, I thought, well, he's upselling me, which is, I've always been told that's a smart thing, the extra sale. But he didn't. He put the spray in the bag for free. That is creating a relationship with a consumer that they do not get in the major chains. Because the major chains are looking at you as a customer, not as a relationship. And that is why independents can always outrun the chains, because if they understand things like that. People love free. You know, there's a whole retail vertical that never take a markdown ever. All they do is give away stuff for free instead of a markdown, and it's cosmetics. Cosmetics, they gift. They give you swag bags, and they're very successful doing it. So everybody, I want to thank everybody for being on this call. Let's just talk a little bit about the final word on markdowns. To control markdowns, commit and have the courage to have lean inventories and keep them turning. Maintaining liquidity. Cash is the #1 asset you can have. Avoid the last buy. If you're a seasonal business, sometimes you go back to the well one time too often, and then you own that merchandise for the next 6 months as it sits out of season. And use an open-to-buy plan and follow it. It's so, so important. Any attempt to better manage your largest investment in the store, which is inventory, has to begin and revolve around a good budget to begin with. And so with that, Brad, that ends a little bit under an hour, but I promised I would keep it that way, and then we can open this up for questions if people have some.
Oh, that was great, Paul. Really, really full of very valuable information. And I learned even more today, seeing it twice. Well, let me just see if you guys have any questions. Then please don't hesitate to let them put them in the chat window. Let's see here. I've got some that are already coming in. Here's one. What do you do when you are dealing with a manufacturer who controls margins from 6% to 10%?
And I'm assuming you're talking about an MSR, a manufacturer that controls the pricing. And so
Yeah,
that's pre-priced.
That's what it looks like. Yeah.
Okay. You have to do a full analysis in terms of how profitable that manufacturer is. I mean, there are certain things in any retail store that smart retailers carry. They know they're not going to make money on, but they know it creates an ambiance, or there's a reason for doing it that has nothing to do with the profit motive. But those should be kept at a minimum. So everything has to make money. Most merchandise has to carry its own weight. And when manufacturers create these obstacles, as we said in this presentation, where they're creating a manufactured suggested retail price that can be, your consumer can find it online, they can go to another store, then that merchandise needs to perform very, very well and turn very, very well. And if it doesn't, you need to have a sit down and decide whether you even need to carry it.
Another question here. Several accountants told me we cannot use markdowns or coupons as a business deduction. Is that true?
No, that is not true. I mean, markdowns, not markdowns. Okay, wait, let me go back. I think I know what they might be saying. The markdowns that are sold are absolutely a business deduction. But what he may be referring to, I am not an accountant, but I play one on TV. But he might be referring to bulk markdowns where you have depreciated your inventory. Then that probably you would not be able to use that, because remember, accounting is using cost valuations, not retail. Now, if you mark it down, I always tell retailers, by the way, and I hope no one from the IRS is sitting in on this call, but for independent retailers, always remember, if you're showing a profit and not having any cash on hand, you are inventorying merchandise over and over again that has no hopes of selling, and it's going to be reported as a profit. So make sure at the end of the year that you are, at some point, we work with stores who at the end of the year literally take whatever is left and either donate it or throw it in the garbage or take it home and run a garage sale, because they know it's not going to sell in January or February on sale. So in that respect, I'm sure the accountant is saying bulk markdowns are still going to be recorded on accounting as cost. So you can't take that as a deduction. But when it's sold as a markdown, of course, because it raises your cost of goods sold.
Okay. Hernan's got a question here. Do you have a recommendation for a simple open-to-buy plan?
Yes. Very, very easy. All things being equal, beginning and ending inventory is the same. You buy based on what your projected sales are and what your projected margin is. I did a little bit of that when we talked about the budget for markdowns. Let's say, for example, you have a category, and I have whole seminars on category management. But you have a category that you think this season you'll sell $10,000 based on historical sales and what you saw in the marketplace, and so I'm planning it up or planning it down. But let's say we've come up with that determination that our projected revenue for X amount of period of time, 3 months, 6 months, is 10,000. I know I want to maintain, when it's all said and done, clear my inventory. I want to have a maintained markup or gross margin percentage of 45%. So based on that, the cost of the goods bought would be the reciprocal of that number, which is 55%, or on $10,000 in sales, your open to buy would be $5,500 at cost. That's a basic open to buy, but I know many stores who have looked at it this way and have really helped themselves in terms of buying under more control.
Is there any truth to some of the things I've read regarding the psychology with 99 cents, 49 cents, 0 cents, etc.? For instance, restaurants price without cents, $49.21, to suggest that something is valuable or premium.
Yes, 99 cents generally has the connotation of discount. There's no question about that. But the retailer in New York who put 50 cents on every price tag had no ill effects at all from his store. $114 or $114.50, it didn't matter to the customers. They didn't even know it. They didn't even see it. The restaurant business, remember, has a lot more margin than we do. Many times when you go into if you go in and order at a fine restaurant pasta, probably the product, that pasta, its percentage of the actual ingredients that went in there compared to the price you pay is probably only 10 or 15%. So they're working with margin on some of their foods as much as 80 to 90%. So the idea they have to put 50 cents on something is really not anything that they're really that concerned with. Their challenges are not as much that. In our business, and I believe most of the people that are on this call, as are many of the Lightspeed users, are in apparel, shoes, sporting goods, things like that. We don't have 90% margin. So every penny, every nickel, 50 cents can make a big difference. And that's why I believe that's important.
Here's a question from Alicia. The 13-week inventory limit, do you suggest that across all industries? That just told me I am carrying far too much inventory, or better yet, I need to increase my sales.
What was her name?
Alicia.
Alicia, great question. And it is eye-opening, isn't it, after a while? I mean, and by the way, let me just go through kind of inventory levels. Let's say you wanted 4 turns, and let's say your store does 500,000 in sales, and 4 turns is pretty realistic for an independent women's store, women's retailer. That means your average inventory at retail should be 125,000, and your cost inventory should be about 60. So we run into this all the time. I mean, we run into retailers of all verticals, of all stripes, and of all sizes, quite frankly, that carry far too much inventory. It's not uncommon for us to walk into an independent boutique where they're not even getting 2 turns, where they have over 6 months worth of unsold inventory. And remember the perishability, and remember what customers essentially want 2 things in your store when they come in general: what's new and what's on sale. And if you don't have either, you're going to have trouble with revenue. One of the things that you can do to do more business and grow your way out of this is start turning your inventory faster, getting rid of the old inventory immediately, start buying based on time and not based on square footage of the store. And when the customers start seeing newness every visitation, they come in more often. And when you're faster to take a markdown, today markdowns by the major chains, when you walk into a Zara, an H&M, a Club Monaco, a Banana Republic, these kind of international chains from Europe, Canada, and the United States, their first markdown is generally now half off. They know that for the consumer out there, that 20 or 30% off has less meaning, and they have to go to half off to really make it work. If you do that, get rid of the mistakes immediately. Always have a flow of new coming in every month, but never having too much on hand at any given period of time. You'll do more sales. And we've seen this happen over the 30 or 40 years that RMSA has been in business.
Andrew's got a great question here. If a new startup business, how best to message introductory offers to build new business and relationships?
Start by thinking, the worst thing you can do on opening a new store, if it's a brick and mortar store, is going in with far too much inventory. You need to have a plan based on making money, certainly. Rent should be about 10%. You saw the slide on shoe stores, which was 8. 10% is a very good rule of thumb. If your rent runs you in your new store $40,000 a year, let's just say a round number, your store really needs to do $400,000 in sales. So once we know what and that's the benchmark to use on a new store. What am I going to be paying in rent? And then what do I need to do in revenue to make sure I can pay the rent and all the other costs that go with it? Once you have that number around overhead, then you have to decide, what am I going to open with in terms of quantity of inventory? What's the mix? How many? If it's a women's store, how many dresses? Dresses are going to be determined by what time of year. If it's fall, maybe 0 or a low amount. If it's spring, a lot, depending on the type of store you have. So it needs to be done by category, and then it needs to be thought of in terms of, I want this much for opening day, but then I want to flow in after that, because if I just have all my inventory for the season or the opening and nothing new coming in for the next 2 or 3 months, your store is going to be very exciting the opening day and probably a pretty cool store the first 3 weeks. But fairly soon you're going to get broken on items, and nothing new is going to come in to replace that, because you can't afford it because everything was there for the beginning, and you're going to run into trouble. So you have to think about stock rotation when you think about the inventory you put into that store. This is actually what we do. It's a crass advertisement for RMSA, but this is how we help retailers.
This one comes from Julian. How do you compete with major retailers when they can sell products for less than you can buy it?
You can give away suede spray. You understand that, again, that customer is an opportunity. I'm going to say it again. I think it's so important. The customer coming in your store is not someone just to sell something, is to build a relationship with. I recently had the opportunity last year when I was in Los Angeles to meet one of the smartest retailers, a woman served on the board at Williams-Sonoma, Hannah Anderson, a number of great retailers in North America. And one of the things she told me was not just that, the idea, the concept of relationships instead of just customers. She also said one of the things they did at Williams-Sonoma is they tried to keep them in the store as long as they could. One of the things Starbucks has done a beautiful job with, whoever thought you come in to us and pay as much as you do for coffee at Starbucks and love it, but you can go in there, read the paper, go online, have a donut. I mean, they have done everything they can, and they are successful because they keep the customer in the store, creating this great experience. Everything you can do is around that. Don't cut corners on that. Treat your customers. Do things for them that the major chains don't. And if you do that and have inventory that they won't necessarily find, interesting inventory that they don't necessarily find. The chains play inventory, by the way, particularly in apparel, I'm talking about, but shoes as well, very safe. It's all programmed out. It's all the same resources. It's all homogenized when you go into major chains. The U.S. itself has become homogenized. Canada, unfortunately, is starting to be like that as well, which is very sad. The one thing I always loved about Canada is that you would go in and see a lot of independent retailers, and unfortunately that is now starting to change, where it's more and more all the malls look alike. Be different. Be different. Offer good service and the merchandise you carry, and you'll be very, very successful. The independent retailers that we work with at RMSA outperform the chains in every aspect, from sales per square foot to inventory turnover to margin.
This is an interesting one. How does good, better, best assortment planning factor into the markdown planning? For example, the best line in a category moves slower, but provides a halo effect on the rest of the category.
Mm-hmm. I'm not sure how I should answer that. There are some things that you should buy. I like the term halo effect, by the way. That's really, I might steal that from you. Years ago, I worked with I live in Minneapolis, Minnesota, by the way, and I worked with a small chain of women's stores here owned by a woman who was super good, super smart. And I was a young man, and I remember going through her numbers and showing her certain parts of her store that weren't making money. And, it was essentially, in women's fashion, it was designer and bridge, very expensive. And so I was showing her how much money she was losing, which I remember at the time, this was 20 years ago, was $300,000. And she looked at me and she goes, "Let me explain something to you, young man, that you clearly don't understand about retail." And at that time, I knew I was going to get a good tongue lashing. And she said, I know how much money I'm losing in Valentino and all these other designers that are so expensive that don't sell at full price, but create a halo effect. See, I'm already taking this. I love it. Create a halo effect around my other merchandise that makes my other merchandise look better, less expensive, and gives my store an image that I want that no other major chains, like here in Minneapolis at the time, Dayton's department store, didn't carry. So there is room for certain things in a store that are important to carry, even though they don't turn, as the questioner said, and they don't make us any money, if any, maybe lose money, but there is a purpose for that creates the overall ambiance in the store. And I agree with that. But you just have to be careful that you have the right amount. In other words, you can't have 50% of your store being there just as ambiance and you're losing money, because you'll never make money then. I hope that answers the question.
Barry from Kentucky's got an interesting approach to markdowns. He says we blow out old inventory on an online site legally that sometimes brings less than we can sell it at in the store, but keeps us from seeming like a closeout place. Our average customer doesn't even know about or use this online site, so our name isn't even connected with it. We like to keep a boutique feel and not a closeout feel. Any comments?
Beautiful, Barry. Don't change. That is absolutely wonderful. Everything you say I agree with, and more stores should try to do something like that if you can pull it off, but you're doing a great job.
And Lorraine says, any advice for a new women's boutique that is opening this fall?
Have a plan on inventory based on how you can be profitable in terms of revenue or sales, and then break your store into categories and manage your inventory better that way. When you set up your Lightspeed system, make sure you categorize. When you think about organizing your data in inventory, use the rule of 10. Oftentimes, a mistake that retailers make when they set up classifications or subclassifications or departments is that they overdo it. So use the rule of 10. Your store should not have more than 10 departments. In each department, they should not have more than 10 classifications or categories. In each classification or category, you should not have more than 10 sub-classifications or categories. Stay to that principle. You'll have plenty. You'll have organized your data, but it won't be so much that it becomes unusable, which is a common mistake new people have.
Okay, if your competitors, in my case service providers, are priced at a fixed rate, is it sensible to price at the same price or to change slightly more for a better differentiated service?
It depends. If you can charge more for a better service, and if you know exactly where their weaknesses are, that they are not doing this and I am intending to do this, people will pay for better service. Actually, it's pretty interesting. If you talk about the psychology of shopping, most surveys done over the past 20 years, but even surveys done more recently, price is very low down the list in terms of why you shop at stores, or in this case, it'd be a service provider. And usually in the 10 reasons, the top 10 reasons why customers shop certain retailers, price is about 8th. It is well below things like the customer experience and easy returns and product guarantees and great service in the store and good selection, and those things all come far above price. The consumer will pay more if you give them a reason to. You know, Starbucks is, as we all know, a very, very successful retailer. But they're not giving away that coffee. If you think gasoline has been expensive in the United States and Canada, calculate what a gallon of latte costs at Starbucks. It is successful not because it's the cheapest coffee, it's because of the experience you get within the store. So if you can, in whatever service industry you're doing, offer something more, people will respond.
Okay, that looks like it wraps up the questions, and I just really want to thank our attendees, and thank you, Paul, for presenting this fantastic information. Like I said at the beginning, this deliberate and thoughtful approach to what you're presenting your products at and their prices, I think has benefits in a whole bunch of ways.
Thanks, Brad, very much. And if anyone on the call is interested, of course, you see my email and, of course, our company website, which I have a series of videos called Prescriptions for Profit. They're available on YouTube. They're only 3 or 4 minutes long, and it's very, very good. You can share with your staff, your partner, your spouse, and they can be also found on our website at rmsa.com. Thanks, Brad, for this great opportunity, and we really, really do treasure and appreciate our relationship with Lightspeed.
We do too. Okay, everybody, have a great day.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.